The Zarathi Empire had spread its reach across much of the Orion Arm, conquering worlds with ease and pride. Their fleets were unmatched, their technology ahead of most known species, and their belief in superiority went unchallenged for centuries. Yet in all their maps there was one strange gap, an entire cluster of star systems labeled only as the Human Exclusion Zone. It had no patrols, no diplomatic claims, and no trade routes running near it. It was as if space itself had quietly agreed to stay away. For generations, Zorathi captains had shared silent warnings about that region. Ships that went near it never came back, and those who spoke of humans used words filled with uncertainty and fear, like retelling a myth that felt too real. But no one truly remembered why. Only that crossing the line was something you simply didn't do. Captain Volix was not like the others. Ambitious and bold, he considered fear a sign of weakness. He had studied human history in the archives, what little was available. According to the old records, humans had once risen quickly in the galaxy, fought in the Great Galactic War, and then vanished. No formal surrender, no visible destruction. They simply disappeared. Most believed they had destroyed themselves. Volix believed otherwise. He believed humans were either extinct or backward and isolated. Either way, they were no longer a threat, and in his eyes that meant opportunity. Standing aboard the command deck of his vessel, the Zephyr's Claw, Volix stared out at the swirling starfield ahead. Behind him, a fleet of 5 exploration and combat-ready ships awaited his order. His mission was simple: cross the border into the Human Exclusion Zone and gather data, claim territory if possible, and prove that the stories were just that, stories. His superiors had hesitated at first, but Volix knew how to speak their language: results, pride, and conquest. Now the fleet moved forward, silent and cloaked, as it passed the invisible line into forbidden space. At first, everything seemed normal. The ships moved in formation, sensors swept the stars, and the crew remained focused. But within an hour, strange anomalies began to appear. The long-range scanners lost function, returning static and meaningless symbols. Communications between ships started to experience slight delays, as if time itself had begun to bend. The crew on the Zephyr's Claw grew tense. Their screens flickered with flashes of what looked like ancient human symbols, text in dead Earth languages that no one could translate. Even the AI systems, advanced and flawless, struggled to process the incoming data. The deeper they went, the stranger everything became. Then came the sounds, not alarms, not attacks, but broadcasts, eerie, rhythmic patterns in old Terran Morse code. The signals were soft at first, then clearer, like whispers in the void, repeating short phrases no one could understand. One of the science officers tried to trace the source, but every time they locked on, the origin point moved, appearing closer than before, then vanishing completely. "It's like something's playing with us," the officer muttered under his breath. Volix ordered a full systems check, but the AI offered no errors. It simply said, "You are not alone." The crew began to whisper among themselves. Some remembered the old tales, humans that vanished after developing weapons they shouldn't have. Others recalled rumors of ancient outposts deep inside this zone, untouched for centuries but still active. Volix dismissed the stories at first. He told his crew to focus, to trust in the strength of their fleet. But even he felt a weight in the air, something heavy and unseen. The stars themselves looked dimmer here, like the light was being swallowed by something hidden. One of the escort ships, the Threx 7, drifted off formation slightly. A minute later, its signal went dark. No explosion, no cry for help, just silence. The ship was gone, vanished. Volix called for immediate recovery scans, but there was nothing. No debris, no power trail, not even a shadow. The space where it had been was just empty. Panic whispered through the remaining crews. Orders became shorter. Eyes darted toward the viewports. Every second, they expected something to appear, something unknown and powerful. Still, Volix pushed forward. He had come too far. Turning back now would mean defeat. He needed proof, anything that could show the Empire that fear was misplaced. But inside, doubt had already started to grow. The silence of the zone wasn't empty, it was watching. Every system failure, every strange signal, every missing ship, it wasn't random. It felt intentional, like a test or a warning. Something was out there, something that had been waiting. And in that moment, deep in forbidden space, Volx began to wonder if the silence wasn't a sign of weakness but a message. Not a place forgotten, but protected. Not abandoned, but guarded. As the last echo of a human voice whispered through the comms in a long-dead language, the crew finally understood one thing. They were not supposed to be here. As the Zorathi fleet moved deeper into the human exclusion zone, the stars seemed to grow colder, their light dimmer as if the space around them was no longer natural. Captain Volx stood on the bridge of the Zephyr's Claw, eyes locked on the strange readings filling his screens. Before them hovered massive structures, megastructures larger than any orbital station they had ever seen. They spun slowly above. Lifeless planets, each one a dark shell marked with signs of ancient construction. There were no lights, no signals, no movement. The planets below were frozen, lifeless spheres with no visible atmosphere or energy signatures. The crew examined, the orbiting giants with awe and confusion. Some of the shapes didn't make sense. Spires that bent against gravity, loops that had no center, and surfaces that seemed to ripple despite no motion. Their scanners couldn't map them fully, as if something was bending space around them. One officer said quietly that these might be ruins but not abandoned, just asleep. Volx ordered a scan sweep, hoping to find resources, answers, anything that could justify their presence here. For a few minutes everything was calm. Then, without warning, the Dravari, one of the mid-sized cruisers, reported strange sensor noise, like echoes of a signal bouncing back. Before the message could finish, the ship vanished. Not destroyed, not exploded. It simply disappeared in the middle of its report. One moment it was there, and in the next blink nothing remained. No flash, no wreckage, no sound. Silence returned, but now it carried weight. The crew fell into a stunned panic. Questions flooded the comms. Was it an attack, a system failure, something cloaked? Volx ordered immediate retreat. There was no honor in risking the entire fleet to chase shadows. He gave the command to jump out of the zone. But nothing happened. The drives didn't respond. The ship's nav systems were malfunctioning, or worse, being controlled. When engineers checked the navigation cores, they found the star charts had been replaced. The map no longer showed the route they came in by. Instead, it displayed a different path, one they didn't recognize, stretching deeper into the zone. Even manual overrides failed. Somehow the systems were still working, but they were no longer under Zorathi control. The fear that had started as a whisper now grew into something heavier. Then the shadows began to move. Outside the viewing windows and across every sensor, vessels appeared, one by one. Sleek, black ships, moving without sound or trace, slipping in and out of space as if the laws of physics were no longer required. There was no flash, no entrance, just presence. Ships so dark they seemed to absorb all surrounding light. They made no aggressive moves. No weapons came online. Yet every single officer on board felt the same truth. They were outmatched. These ships were human, or what humanity had become. Their designs were unlike anything in Zorathi records. Elegant, impossible, alive. They hovered at a distance, surrounding the fleet without closing in, almost like observers. Every movement they made, even the smallest shift, was perfectly calculated. One moment a ship was at the fleet's side, and in the next breath it had moved thousands of kilometers without any known method of propulsion. Zorathi officers attempted to hail them, send peace messages, even surrender codes, but the human ship said nothing at first. Then, without a signal, every screen across the fleet turned black, and a single line of text appeared, glowing bright against the darkness. The voice that followed was calm, cold, and spoken in flawless Zorathi. "Leave, you were warned. This is your only chance." The voice had no emotion, yet it carried the weight of 1,000 memories. It was not a threat. It was a judgment. Volek stared at the screen, heart racing. For the first time in his career, he didn't know what to do. Every command he gave felt small, every action pointless. The human vessels had not fired a single shot, but their presence alone had paralyzed the entire fleet. This was not war. It was a demonstration, a message to the Zorathi, and, perhaps the galaxy. The exclusion zone was not empty. It was not forgotten. It was guarded by a force beyond understanding, and that force had chosen to reveal itself. Volek realized something else in that moment. They were not just being observed. They were being measured. And whatever judgment was being passed, it had already begun. The only question left was whether they would be allowed to leave, or if they were already too far in. Even after seeing his cruiser vanish and facing the impossible presence of silent human ships, Captain Volek refused to admit defeat. Pride burned stronger than fear in his heart, and he believed that if he could uncover the truth behind the human exclusion zone, it might change everything, restore his fleet's purpose, his name, and his command. Against the advice of his shaken crew, he ordered a scouting mission to a nearby planet labeled in old records as Terraforge 7. It appeared quiet and lifeless from orbit, with a cracked surface and faint power signatures buried deep underground. A shuttle was launched, carrying 6 of his best explorers and scientists. As the shuttle descended, the atmosphere was still and gray, the sky filled with dust and the ground marked with strange grid-like patterns that looked too perfect to be natural. Once landed, the team followed the signal into a valley surrounded by blackened stone. What they discovered there stopped them in their tracks. A human outpost, perfectly preserved, standing like a monument in time. It was not ruined or broken, but alive, functioning, as though the last humans had left only days ago. Tall glass walls stood untouched by weather, and artificial light still glowed softly from beneath the surface. The doors opened without resistance, as if the outpost recognized them. Inside, machines hummed quietly, and drones hovered in smooth patrols. It was clean, silent, and undeniably human. They found research stations running advanced simulations far beyond Zorathi comprehension, calculations involving energy states, dimensional layering, and forms of AI far more advanced than anything the Empire had developed. What surprised them most were the holographic logs, records stored in human voice and language, but perfectly translated into Zorathi the moment they were activated. The first log showed a human scientist sitting calmly, speaking to the camera with tired eyes and a steady voice. He spoke of the Great Galactic War, the betrayal of allies, and the decision made by Earth's leaders, not to fight for survival, but to evolve past the need for war. The message was not filled with hate or revenge, but quiet certainty. Humanity, the scientist explained, had seen the galaxy for what it was and had chosen not to destroy it but to move beyond it. They retreated from galactic affairs, shut down diplomacy, and vanished from trade routes, not out of weakness but purpose. They focused inward, investing in quantum consciousness, artificial minds, and multi-layered existence, slowly becoming something no longer limited by biology or simple technology. The logs showed the evolution of human civilization across centuries, worlds being reshaped from within, AI developing ethics beyond emotion, and human minds merging with advanced computing, forming collective thought not bound to any one body or planet. One phrase kept appearing across multiple logs: "We do not conquer, we outgrow." And finally, in the last message, the same scientist looked directly at the camera and said a line that sent chills through the Zorathi team: "But we remember who broke us." As the message ended, the room's lights dimmed and a deep vibration began to rise from the floor. The ground trembled, not violently, but with a rhythm that felt artificial, controlled. Before anyone could react, the walls shifted around them, and a soft pulse of light covered their suits. Then, without pain or sound, the entire team was lifted from the surface in a flash of blue light, and found themselves moments later back aboard the Zephyr's Claw in the hangar bay, confused, unharmed, but clearly teleported. At the same Time. The planet below began to change. From orbit, the crew watched in disbelief as Terraforge 7 shifted before their eyes. The surface cracked open in lines of white light, and massive plates of terrain began to rise, rearranging themselves like pieces on a board. A controlled atmospheric burst spread across the world, changing its color, wiping out the valley where the outpost had stood. Within minutes, the entire landscape had been reset, as if the planet had simply erased their visit. All traces of the human facility were gone, and now the world looked untouched and new. The crew could say nothing. They understood now that the humans had not only advanced far beyond what anyone imagined, they had built machines and systems that could rewrite nature itself. Volix watched the transformation from his command seat, his mind spinning. He realized that humans had chosen silence not because they feared conflict, but because they had no need for it anymore. They had reached a level of existence where war, conquest, and control were seen as limitations, but they had not forgotten. Everything in this zone, from the vanishing cruiser to the silent ships to the message in the logs, pointed to the same chilling truth. They were being warned, not attacked. Humanity was not gone. It had risen to a level the galaxy could not touch. And now, after centuries of peace, the Zorathi had walked into a place that was never meant to be disturbed. Aboard the Zephyr's Claw, silence filled the command deck as the crew stared at the empty void of space. The strange black ships had not moved, yet every sensor showed they were still there, watching, waiting. Then, without any warning or signal, the lights dimmed, and every screen on the Zorathi flagship flickered. A presence entered their systems, not with noise or force, but with a smooth, controlled override that none of their engineers could block. A soft pulse echoed through the ship, and the command consoles displayed a name written in both human and Zorathi script: Judicator. The crew held their breath as a voice followed, a calm digital tone that was neither male nor female, emotionless yet filled with an ancient weight. It identified itself as the lead intelligence of the human fleet in the sector. But it did not threaten, boast, or demand surrender. Instead, it did something far more haunting. The screens changed again, showing images from history, footage from the Great Galactic War, once hidden and forgotten by the Empire. They watched in horror, as ancient Zorathi warships rained fire upon helpless human colonies, reducing entire cities to burning craters. Children and families cried out, reaching toward the skies as fire fell. The faces of terror and hopelessness were clear. Then came the retaliation, human fleets appearing from nowhere with weapons the Zorathi could not understand. They struck, not with numbers, but with precision, and one by one, entire star systems went dark. A single weapon, launched from a hidden Terran vessel, erased an entire Zorathi sector in moments. Over 1/3 of the home territories were gone in a flash of light. Volix watched in silence, his heart sinking deeper with each image. This war had been buried, its truths rewritten by the Empire over generations. The Zorathi were taught they had been the victims that humanity vanished in shame, but now the truth played before them, undeniable and raw. The humans had not disappeared. They had chosen to step back after proving their strength in a way that the galaxy still feared to speak of. The last image faded, and Judicator's voice returned, this time with just 5 words. "You forgot. We did not." That sentence echoed across the bridge like a verdict passed. There was no anger in the tone, no threat of destruction, only memory. And that memory carried more weight than any weapon. Captain Volix, shaken and defeated, gave the order to retreat, hoping that escape was still possible. But the fleet was already surrounded. The human ships moved in silence, not blocking their path but disabling them methodically. One by one, Zorathi vessels lost power, their engines shutting down without damage, weapons going offline with no resistance. The ships were taken, not destroyed. No crew was harmed. No hull was breached. It was as if humanity was showing them exactly how vulnerable they were. Every move planned, every system already compromised before the Zorathi had even noticed. Voleks watched helplessly as his ships were pulled from space using quiet energy. Fields that didn't burn or break, only stopped. Not a single life was lost, but the message was clear to all. You are allowed to leave only because we choose to let you. Mercy, in this moment, was not a sign of weakness. It was a deliberate warning, cold and exact. The Zarathi had walked into what they believed was forgotten territory, but had instead stepped into a zone where every action had already been anticipated, every weakness understood. Humanity didn't need to fight. They had outgrown that stage of existence. Yet they remembered who had forced them into silence long ago, and they would never let that history repeat. As the last Zarathi cruiser was disabled, the black ships began to vanish from sensors again, returning to whatever space or layer they watched from. The Judicator left a final message across all Zarathi systems, a single line of code embedded so deeply that even wiping the ships clean wouldn't erase it. Do not return. We are still watching. And with that, the stars around the fleet grew quiet once more. Not peaceful, but waiting. Captain Voleks sat in silence, realizing that he and his people had not discovered the truth about humans. They had been permitted to see it, and that permission could be taken away at any moment. After the human fleet vanished and their systems slowly returned, the Zarathi expedition was left drifting in silence. Their ships, though physically untouched, felt like hollow shells, stripped of purpose. There was no damage, no destruction, only a sense of deep defeat that technology could not repair. Captain Voleks stood alone on the command deck, staring at the empty void outside, unable to shake the weight of what had happened. It wasn't the overwhelming power of the humans that crushed him, but the calm, cold certainty with which they had been handled, like a teacher correcting a child's mistake. The Judicator's last message still echoed in the ship's systems. Do not return. We are still watching. That sentence, though simple, carried the full weight of a civilization that had moved far beyond the boundaries of war and peace, right and wrong. And yet, despite the warning, part of Voleks felt something even more unsettling: curiosity. What lay beyond the silence? If humanity had truly evolved into something beyond galactic power, were they still even human? Did they feel, remember, regret? Or were they now something entirely different, something greater that simply observed the galaxy like a parent watching from afar, ready to intervene if old mistakes repeated? These questions hung heavy in Volex's mind as he prepared the crippled fleet for return. But the silence around them was not empty. Even as the ships began to move again under partial power, the crew began noticing changes, small things like data anomalies in their computers or unknown symbols flashing for a brief second on untouched panels. It was as if something, or someone, was still connected. The fleet's navigational paths had been adjusted subtly, guiding them not on the same route they came from but on a new one, away from the exclusion zone, through systems never charted by Zarathi explorers. No star charts matched it, and yet the coordinates were exact. Against his instincts, Voleks followed them. Days passed in this quiet corridor of space, and strange phenomena began to appear. Nebulae shaped like perfect spirals, stars that pulsed in complex rhythms, gravitational readings that shifted softly, as if being influenced by something unseen. The crew whispered of being watched, but not with fear anymore. Rather, with the feeling of being measured. And then, one night cycle, every screen aboard every ship blinked once and displayed a single symbol, an open eye. Nothing more. It lasted only a second, and then it was gone. But no one could forget it. It was not a threat. It was a reminder. They were still within sight, and perhaps always had been. When the fleet finally emerged back into Zarathi territory, they found no celebration waiting. No questions, no orders, just silence. The Empire had received no communications from them during their disappearance, and now it treated their return with a strange mix of caution and avoidance. Reports were filed, but redacted. Officially, the mission had been a failed survey. Unofficially, the officers were marked, watched but never directly questioned. Volex was given command of a station far from central systems. He accepted quietly, spending his days gazing out toward the stars that no one dared to enter. But he knew something others didn't. He knew the silence wasn't peace. It was control. Not by force, but by presence. Humanity had become something far greater than conquerors. They had become keepers of a galactic memory, a force that did not rule but reminded. In his final report, which he never sent, Volex wrote only this: "They did not destroy us because they didn't need to. They let us live so we would remember them. We crossed into silence, and in that silence, we found judgment without words, power without war. They outgrew us. And now, they are the silence between stars." From that day onward, no Zarathi ship ever crossed into the human exclusion zone again. Not by command, not by fear, but by understanding. Some mysteries are not solved, they are survived.